have many concerns about your record, and particularly your public statements, because they are so hurtful to the men and women who are currently serving in the U.S. military, harmful to morale, harmful to good order and discipline. If you are saying that women shouldn't be serving in the military, and I'm going to read you your quotes, because the quotes themselves are terrible. You will have to change how you see women to do this job well, and I don't know if you are capable of that.
The chamber was a showdown, and at the center of it sat Pete Hegseth, Trump ally, facing the toughest test of his life, his confirmation hearing for Secretary of Defense. On the other side was Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, a fierce defender of women in uniform, armed with years of evidence and a sharp memory. What unfolded was less of a Q&A and more of a brutal clash over who gets to serve this country and under what standards.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Hegseth. I do want to thank you for your service, and I want to thank you for your willingness to serve in this capacity.
Thank you, Senator.
So I want to press on these issues that my colleague Jeanne Shaheen brought up, because she said it so well. So first of all, you answered your questionnaire. Do you believe that any American who wants to serve in their country in the military and can meet objective standards set by the military should be allowed to serve without limitation? You've said yes to that question. But then in all of these other circumstances, you've denigrated active duty service members. We have hundreds of women who are currently in the infantry, lethal members of our military serving in the infantry, but you degrade them. You say, we need moms, but not in the military, especially in combat units. So specific to Senator Cotton's question, because Senator Cotton was giving you layups to differentiate between different types of combat. And specifically, as Secretary, would you take any action to reinstitute the combat arms exclusion for female service members, knowing full well you have hundreds of women doing that job right now? And the standards, your 2-mile run, Tom, is about the Army Combat Fitness Test. It is not the requirements to have an MOS 11 Bravo, which is the infantry. These are the requirements today for people serving in the industry, men and women. They are gender neutral, and they are very difficult to meet. They have not been reduced in any way, and our combat units, our infantry is lethal. So please explain specifically, because you will be in charge of 3 million personnel. It is a big job. And when you make these public statements, and I get you were not Secretary of Defense then, I get you were on TV, I get you were helping veterans, I get it was a different job. But most recently, you said this in November of 2024, knowing full well you might have been named as Secretary of Defense. So please explain these types of statements, because they're brutal and they're mean and they disrespect men and women who are willing to die for this country.
Well, Senator, I appreciate your comments. And I would point out, I've never disparaged women serving in the military. I respect every single female service member that has put on the uniform, past and present. My critiques, Senator, recently and in the past, and from personal experience, have been instances where I've seen standards lowered, and you mentioned 11 Alpha, 11 Bravo, MOS, places in units, and the book that has been referenced multiple times here, The War on Warriors. I spent months talking to active duty service members, men and women, low ranks, high ranks, combat arms and not combat arms. And what each and every one of them told me, and which personal instances have shown me, is that in ways direct, indirect, overt, and subtle, standards have been changed inside infantry training units, ranger school, infantry battalions, to ensure that
Give me one example. Please give me an example. I get you're making these generalized statements.
Commanders meet quotas to have a certain number of female infantry officers or infantry enlisted, and that disparages those women who are incredibly capable of meeting that standard.
Commanders do not have to have a quota for women in the infantry. That does not exist. It does not exist. And your statements are creating the impression that these exist, because they do not. There are not quotas. We want the most lethal force. But I'm telling you, having been here for 15 years, listening to testimony about men and women in combat and the type of operations that were successful in Afghanistan and in Iraq, women were essential for many of those units. When Ranger units went in to find where the terrorists hiding in Afghanistan or in Iraq, if they had a woman in the unit, they could go in, talk to the women in a village, say, where are the terrorists hiding? Where are the weapons hiding? And get crucial information to make sure that we can win that battle. So you cannot denigrate women in general, and your statements do that. We don't want women in the military, especially in combat. What a terrible statement. So please, do not deny that you've made those statements. You have. We take the responsibility of standards very seriously, and we will work with you. I'm equally distressed you would not meet with me before this hearing. We could have covered all of this before you came here, so I could get to the 15 other questions that I want to get to. So women, you have denigrated. You have also denigrated members of the LGBTQ community. Did you know that when Don't Ask, Don't Tell was in place, we lost so many crucial personnel, over 1,000 in mission-critical areas. We lost 10% of all our foreign language speakers because of a political policy. You said in your statement, you don't want politics in the DOD. Everything you've said in these public statements is politics. I don't want women. I don't want moms. What's wrong with a mom, by the way? Once you have babies, you therefore are no longer able to be lethal. I mean, you're basically saying women, after they have children, can't ever serve in the military in a combat role. It's a silly thing to say. It's a silly thing to say, beneath the position that you are aspiring to. To denigrate LGBTQ service members is a mistake. If you are a sharpshooter, you're as lethal regardless of what your gender identity is, regardless of who you love. So please know this to be a true statement. So you say it was a political thing. You say it undermined us, social engineering. I don't know why someone having to publicly say or not publicly say who they love is social engineering. I think having that policy in the first place was highly problematic. And as you said in your statement, do you agree anybody should be able to serve in the military if they meet the standards?
Senator, as the president has stated, I don't disagree with the overturn of Don't Ask, Don't Tell.
Great, because I don't want you thinking, can't serve if you're a mom, can't serve if you're LGBTQ, and then last, can't serve if you're a leftist. The statements you said about people who have views differently than you, that we're the enemy, are you saying that 50% of the DOD, if they hold liberal views or leftist views or are Democrats, are not welcome in the military? Are you saying that?
Senator, I volunteered to deploy to Afghanistan under Democrat President Barack Obama. I also volunteered to guard the inauguration of Joe Biden, but was denied the opportunity to serve because I was identified as an extremist by my own unit for a Christian tattoo.
Gillibrand started softly, almost politely, thanking Hegseth for his service, but the warmth lasted seconds. Her tone shifted quickly, straight into cold steel. She told him flat out she had serious concerns about his record and his public statements. And then she dropped the first bomb, accusing him of making remarks that were harmful to morale, disrespectful to those serving, and corrosive to the very discipline the military depends on. Gillibrand had the receipts. She read Hegseth's own quotes back to him, the ones where he dismissed the role of women in the military, where he argued moms had no place in combat units. Each line she recited carried a sting, not just because of what was said, but because the audience knew these weren't rumors. And she didn't stop there. Gillibrand moved straight to the most explosive issue: women in combat. She reminded the room that hundreds of women already serve in infantry roles. She shredded the mom argument too. What, she asked, does motherhood have to do with combat readiness? To back her point, she brought up hard data. The Army Combat Fitness Test, she explained, is gender neutral. The standards are the same for men and women, and they remain extremely difficult to meet. Hegseth tried to shift gears. He insisted that he wasn't disparaging women, but rather raising concerns about standards being lowered and quotas being pushed. He referenced his book and conversations with service members, claiming there were subtle and indirect ways standards had been adjusted to meet diversity goals. But Gillibrand was ready for this pivot. She cut him off with surgical precision. Commanders do not have quotas for women in the infantry. That does not exist. Her rebuttal wasn't just about technical accuracy. She flipped the entire argument against him. By pushing the idea of quotas, Gillibrand argued, Hegseth was actually insulting the women who had already passed the tests. These women didn't sneak through on lowered bars. They fought tooth and nail under the same grueling expectations to earn their place. Suggesting otherwise was the real insult. Then came the combat reality check. Gillibrand reminded everyone in the room how women were not only serving, but in many cases, were mission critical. In Iraq and Afghanistan, female soldiers often played the decisive role in gathering intelligence from local women, something male soldiers could never do in those societies. That information saved lives, shaped missions, and exposed hidden weapons and insurgents. Without women in those roles, many operations would have failed. Gillibrand wasn't done yet. She made it crystal clear that this fight wasn't just about women in combat boots. No, she zoomed out and exposed the bigger picture. Pete Hegseth didn't just have a problem with women. He had a history of taking swipes at whole groups of people who wear the uniform. And the next target she brought up? The LGBTQ community. She reminded the room that Hegseth had gone on record bashing policies that allowed gay and lesbian service members to serve openly. That's not some small issue either. For years, the don't ask, don't tell policy had ripped talent out of the military. Gillibrand hit him with the numbers. Over 1,000 mission-critical personnel lost, including about 10% of all foreign language speakers. Think about that. At the height of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, when translators and cultural experts were worth their weight in gold, we kicked them out over politics. That wasn't just unfair, that was national security malpractice. And here was Hegseth, pretending that allowing people to serve openly was some kind of social engineering. Gillibrand's response was cutting. The real social engineering was forcing people to hide who they were in the first place. She pointed straight at his hypocrisy. He claimed he didn't want politics in the Department of Defense, but every single one of his statements was dripping with politics. The kind of politics that weakened the force instead of strengthening it. She reached for one of his more outrageous comments, his habit of calling people with left-leaning political views the enemy. Hegseth scrambled to recover. He tried to defend himself by pointing out that he'd served under Barack Obama and even volunteered to help guard Joe Biden's inauguration. But then came the kicker. He admitted that his own unit had flagged him as an extremist because of a tattoo. The irony was almost too much. Here was a man who labeled others as dangerous based on politics, now complaining that he'd been mislabeled himself. The audience didn't need a fact-checker. The contradiction spoke for itself. What started as a polite opening turned into a devastating takedown. And for everyone watching, it wasn't just about Pete Hegseth anymore, it was about the future of the military. Like this video and subscribe to the channel for more updates.